Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not
Two
kobolds in a trench coat. We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today. On today's episode, we have a player who rage quit because the BBEG was too sympathetic, and a party whose flair for the dramatic got everyone killed. Player is furious that my BBEG is too sympathy-inducing, by Reddit user SilkSmooth32. Hey folks, hope you're having a good day. Also, forgive me for any mistakes in grammar. English isn't my native language. I'll try to keep this short. I've been DMing for a group for roughly 2 years now, and due to my style of DMing, which involves lots of foreshadowing, clues, etc., they have just now met the BBEG. The thing is, when I was creating this particular fellow, I wanted to try something different from my usual. This particular villain has one wish and one wish only. He wishes to die. Due to some circumstances, he is cursed with immortality. Yeah, we've all heard that story before, but I've never actually run such a story. I've always viewed immortality as the worst curse one can have upon oneself. To see everyone you've ever connected with crumble and disappear, to witness funeral after funeral, to never truly allow yourself to feel love or to be loved, or it will be ephemeral. And in the end, only you would stand living, if you can call that a life. But why is he a villain, you ask? His life is painful, his existence is suffering. He wishes it to end and will do everything in his power to do so. He has tried so many ways, but none have really worked. Now he will try, he will bring down the realm, he will destroy everything. But when all is gone, he hopes he will be as well.
This is actually a really fascinating concept, especially for a BBEG in a D&D campaign, because a lot of times BBEGs just are. They're big, they're bad, and you just are trying to kill them. They're villains.
They're mustache-twirling evil.
Yeah. And for a campaign, that makes a lot of sense. You don't necessarily have time for a BBE backstory. But I actually like this. This is fascinating, and I would agree with OP. In this sense, immortality is very much a curse.
I think it's really good actually when the party have a moral question about whether the guy they're fighting is actually evil. They obviously have to stop him if they're a good aligned party. However, the way in which they stop him then becomes very complicated. Do they actually find a way to kill him, or do they try to be more sympathetic? Although, is killing him actually the most sympathetic thing to do in this situation? It raises a lot of good moral questions the party have to try and answer. I thought it would be an interesting narrative and story to have a less power-hungry villain character. So we've been building up to it over these 2 years. Now they have finally faced him and learned of his ultimate goal, his reasoning, and his pain. This happened last session, and we ended up on a cliffhanger when they learned about it. The problem arose when we ended the session, which I thought was absolutely amazing. One of my players became absolutely angry. He started to shout angrily with words that I will not write down, as I'm sure they will not fit in the sub. He claimed that I was ruining D&D for him, that villains should be villains, that he didn't play to feel sympathetic for his enemies. He claimed I was an absolute a-hole for trying to make them feel pity for someone they should defeat, and things really escalated even though I tried to de-escalate the situation. My other players tried to reason with him, saying that it was a good story and all that, but he was having none of it. Truth be told, I've never seen someone that angry before, which honestly did make me slightly taken aback. He left my house, where we host our game, almost storming out. I apologised to the players who remained there and told them that was not my intention. They seemed to have enjoyed the story and not really bothered by it, but the situation is sour to say the least. Now, here I am, considering that I should just stick with run-of-the-mill cartoon villains, which honestly isn't what I like, but I don't want to go through something like this again. Well, this is my story. I'm sure it's not as horrifying as some out there, but well, it really did a number on my self-confidence as a DM. Cheers, folks. TLDR. A player got furious because the BBEG had a very sympathetic story and stormed out after cussing me, which led to the mood of our table souring.
Villains are actually a very interesting subject when it comes to storytelling, because there has been a push in recent times for having villains that are sympathetic, even in like Disney settings where they're retelling a fairy tale or something like that. I can see where the player's coming from, in that I feel like there are times when a sympathetic villain just isn't appropriate. in a story. Sometimes you need to have a bad guy that's a bad guy, you know? But in this setting, in D&D, where you don't tend to have these villains that are maybe not quite as villainous as we once thought, I think that I 100% agree with OP that this is a good storyline. And his players are correct. This is good and this is interesting.
Some of the best storytelling in D&D and in general comes where the players or the audience have to answer a moral question about, is this guy really evil? And we're not just talking about the Thanos was right crowd here. In the real world, motivations are complex. Perspective matters. To put it in the most simplest terms, you could boil it down to one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. However, that's a gross oversimplification and not really applicable, but you get what I'm driving at. In this particular instance, the villain is not evil, but his actions are, and this is where the real moral quandary comes in. How far do you go to stop him? What ways do you use that? And that's really good.
That's the thing with D&D. Like I said, villains tend to be very black and white, evil, bad guy situations. So bringing in a BBEG who is immortal and then doing these bad things so that he could get killed is a very interesting thing to think about. You know, what would happen if he just lived with the grief of outliving everybody that he loved and didn't do bad things in order to try and get himself killed? Maybe it would be a different scenario.
On some level, I can sympathize the tiniest bit with the player. They clearly like their villains to be evil, so they can just blow off steam and do what they feel they need to do to him and unwind in that way. They clearly don't like to come into D&D and then have to answer complex moral philosophical questions. However, at the end of the day, D&D is a storytelling narrative, and so these kind of complex plot points and characters really make it enthralling and engaging. Definitely overreacted by getting that angry though, that was huge.
When it comes to the question of should a bad guy be a bad guy, you know, no questions asked situation, I think it really comes down to the narrative that you're trying to tell and also just the appropriateness of the situation. There are stories that storytellers have basically tried to create villains that are sympathy inducing to the point that it feels inappropriate to the story, and then all of a sudden you don't really have a villain anymore, and then everything is just meh. I think a good example of this would be the TV show Once Upon a Time. Maybe the first couple times that their villains went through a redemption arc, it was cool, but after a while, it's not being done for any narrative purpose. It's being done because they just need to keep the show going.
It's not a redemption arc if it's a circle.
You know, I'll agree, in some media, it does get a little bit overdone to redeem the villain. Because, yeah, sometimes the villain is just the villain, and yeah, a lot of villains do have sympathetic backstories. And I think in this case, that's sort of what the DM is doing. He's not turning it into, oh, this poor person, this poor BBEG, feel sorry for them. I don't think that he's trying to downplay the bad things that this character has done. It's more like, hey, maybe things just aren't as black and white as we think. All that said, the player 100% overreacted. I get being annoyed. That's fine. I can empathize with that. But dude, don't make your DM feel like they're failing as a DM because you don't personally like their style of storytelling. My players tried to pull an Agatha Christie reveal and got everyone killed by stub bends. Sometimes, players make their own fun, and I wanted to share an amazing story from a recent game where their hubris and love for the dramatic reveals was their undoing. A recurring villain in my campaign has been an extremely powerful ghost that frequently possesses NPCs in order to manipulate the party. This came to a head when the ranger killed his own love interest, a mercenary accompanying the players since the start of the game, thinking that he had betrayed him. As the cackling ghost managed to escape, gleefully tormenting the poor ranger, my players declared that they despised this character like no other villain they had ever encountered. It was as my players hit level 11 that they thought that they finally found a solution. The cleric came up with a plan to use Turn Undead and a full array of undead spells such as Dispel Evil and Good. All they needed to do now was to figure out which NPC was inevitably currently being possessed. So the party did what anyone with a flair for the dramatic would do. They sent a message out to basically every named character in their current city, calling every favor that they had to round up them into one single fortified room. There, they had the barbarian seal the doors, had the ranger and the druid keep a close eye on the suspect. All the while, the cleric climbed up onto a table and began explaining why he'd gathered them all here today. Very Poirot, isn't it?
I don't know, with D&D, I'm more thinking the classic Clue movie starring Tim Curry.
He had threatened to kill me in public. Why would he want to kill you in public?
I think she meant he threatened in public to kill her.
Oh yeah, that too. I've read a fair amount of Agatha Christie in my life, and so I can definitely say this is very Agatha Christie-esque. The detective gets all the suspects in the room and begins to explain the entire case for everyone.
Of course, some D&D parties would just kill them all just to be sure, so...
I mean, that's one way to do it, if you're a murder hobo party. I could see that happening. That would actually also be really funny, and that would end up on a real horror story page. Their vindication upon exposing the villainous ghost was palpable, making it all the more dramatic when they then realized what they'd actually done was to back a powerful enemy into a corner and hand him an entire room filled with hostages.
I feel like I was more on the money there. But the party's not going to kill them all, but they basically just handed the villain a pretty good situation.
Yeah, they should have thought that one through a little bit further, given how big and bad this guy really is. As a side note, the spectral cloud with an upgraded ghost possession trait and a few legendary actions makes for an excellent high-level ghost stat block. The area of effect really comes in handy if you need to demonstrate a callous disregard for human life. My players fought incredibly and emerged victorious, but 6 NPCs, including some of their absolute favorites, had died. The party pivoted to desperately trying to find enough diamonds for the cleric to bring everyone back, and ended up being an incredibly sweet moment where the many, many people the party had saved in their adventures were able to return their favor, donating what few wedding rings and jewelry they had to make things right. In summary, you should absolutely let your players try to wildly shift the genre of your game, including playing into big reveal moments. This was one of the best sessions I've ever had the privilege to run, and it is almost completely driven by my players.
The big thing I noticed there is how the NPCs felt guilty to the party that they owed them something. The party put the NPCs in danger in that room in the first place. They then made it right by reviving them. I don't think the NPCs should be giving up their wedding rings and what few wealthy items they have to the party to make up for the party's mistake.
I mean, the OP alluded to the fact that over the course of their adventure, the party had saved a lot of these people. So I can understand that, they felt indebted to the party.
Maybe I'm overreacting, but I just think the party arguably got those NPCs killed in the first place with their incredibly creative but poorly thought out plan.
Well, he's not talking about what happened in that moment. OP's talking about over the course of the adventure, not just that session.
I don't know. I feel like the party just really blew it with that one, but maybe I'm just a cynic.
Well, we all make mistakes.
Honestly, I think you're just being a cynic because this actually sounds really fun. And OP's right. This is completely player-driven narrative, and that is so cool.
Oh yeah, the narrative side is fantastic. The party really did drive this campaign really well and create a very good story. Just saying it got a lot of people killed who didn't need to be killed in that moment.
Well, isn't that always how it is with D&D though? Let's just be honest. But hopefully they learned their lesson that sometimes a flair for the dramatic is fun, but you do have to think about what's going to happen when you actually get there. There are consequences to your actions.
Like providing the BBEG with hostages and murder victims.
Yeah, something tells me they got too caught up in the big reveal moment to actually think it entirely through. Because especially if you've got a BBEG who literally their thing is possessing other characters.
Still, I think solving this mystery, I'm going to argue it was the party in the meeting room with a terrible plan. Hey man.
Hey, what?
What tool helps a wizard with writing the correct runes into their spell book?
I don't know. What is it?
A spell checker. And with that, we have definitely not been
Two kobolds in a trench coat.
Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.